Hey everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman back with you for the 160th, count them 160, Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom calls. We have a ton to talk about today. Unfortunately, we're going to start with a really terrifying piece of work. Thousands, actually millions of fish have washed up dead in Japan. And of course, the nuclear industry is claiming there's no connection between that and the millions of pounds of radioactive tritium they're dumping into the Pacific Ocean. Of that, I'm glad they have a sense of humor. And we're also going to talk with the great KARL Grossman, who has joined us from Long Island to talk to us about the fiasco at the COP28 gathering, where they're supposed to be talking about saving the planet. And in fact, they have a chair who's talking about how burning fossil fuels doesn't warm the earth. I mean, again, another instance of a sick sense of humor. Talk about a bit about the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, the transition to renewables that's continues to speed up despite the best interests of the fossil nuclear industry to stop it from happening. Get a bit of an update from the great Wendy Lederman in Florida on what's happening in Cop City. And then after 40 minutes past the hour, thereabouts, we're going to be joined by the great John Steiner and Camilla Reese, who will talk to us a bit about fundraising, how to do it, and how it plays into the future of these calls and of the movement. Always something nobody wants to talk about, but uh, these are two of the great experts, and they have really very generously volunteered to deal with us on this. At the top of the hour, 6 o'clock Eastern Time, 3 o'clock Pacific, we are going to talk with Ken Stern and David Saltman, two experts on the Middle East. And Ken Stern is with the Bard College Center for the Study of Hate, which we are certainly in need of at this point in time. And it's going to be a very, very interesting hour. And that will be, again, our time, really our third session for people to chime in on what's happening in the Middle East, the ongoing horror show over there, and the incredibly complicated political, ethnic, religious dynamic that has really overtaken so much of the dialogue here in the United States. So, as usual, we got a full 2 hours. We want to celebrate the legalization of marijuana in Ohio. I lived for decades in Ohio. And it was always illegal. And if any state ever needed marijuana, it's Ohio. But now it's legal there, and they're playing games with it. Of course, the legislature is. But the fact is that you can now walk down the street in Columbus, Ohio, and right up to the state house and the statues of the 7 Ohio presidents, including the greatest of them, Ulysses S. Grant, and you can smoke a doobie right there. Is it right, Steve Caruso? Can you now, if you wanted to, go walk on the steps of
No,
the State
no,
House?
no, no. Stop spreading misinformation.
Oh, I guess as Bogey said when he said that he went to Casablanca for the waters, I was misinformed. Is that not now the
You
law
can't
in
smoke
Ohio?
in public because it's like secondhand smoke. They don't want everybody being exposed to it, especially kids and so forth. So we've got to keep it moderate. We got to be civil about it. And if you want to pray, go into your closet and pray. Essentially, so
So you can I misunderstand. You cannot walk around smoking a joint in Ohio. You have to be in a private place.
yep. Yep, you can't do it in public unless it's a sanctioned, parlor maybe, or the smoke shops. You're allowed to smoke inside the smoke shops, and if they're selling, but right now they're just allowing the um, medical marijuana sellers to sell the legal pot. So, you
Wow.
you can still grow 6 plants. I mean, they still haven't passed legislation on it definitively yet, as far as I know, as of this morning. But they're still working. The
But the
legislatures.
referendum passed. And
Well, the
now
referendum did pass, but the legislature in Ohio is, all hands on deck trying to obfuscate. They're adding a 5% tax on the things. Um, they're limiting the plant growth in a household to 6 instead of 12. It was 6 plants per person. And they've got some other stipulations that they want to add. So we'll see. Yep.
These guys are shameless. Well, here's the big question then. Can you go on the floor of the House of Representatives in Ohio and smoke a joint there? It is an enclosed space, right?
No, it's, that's public space. Can you take a gun into the state house? I don't know. Maybe they want people with guns in the
Oh, I'm
state house.
sure you
They
could
allow
do.
them on the front lawn anyway. I mean, if you're gonna have a gun on the front lawn, what's worse, that or pot? I don't know.
Well, the question is what's legal. So, all right. We also have a situation, an astonishing situation, which we need to mention very quickly. Wendy and I were talking about it before the show, which is the ability or non-ability to get an abortion in Texas and elsewhere. As I think many have seen, there's a woman in Texas who has a very badly deformed fetus. And she has been given all sorts of medical confirmation of this situation. And the Attorney General of the state of Texas, a guy named Ken Paxton, who was recently impeached, although not removed, has personally intervened to forbid this woman, to prevent this woman from having an abortion in Texas, even though it is clearly a life-threatening situation for her, and the baby will not live. I mean, there's just no chance that this fetus will survive. And she is now, it's on the front page of the New York Times. It's pretty amazing when a single woman's deformed fetus winds up on the front page of the New York Times. But she is now leaving Texas to get an abortion somewhere else. It's astonishing. And I do want to quickly welcome Ken Stern from the Bard College Center at Haight. Ken, it's great to have you with us. You're a first timer, and you will be presenting at 6 o'clock Eastern time. You're going to open our discussion. It'll be our third roundtable discussion about the situation in the Middle East. But we're honored to have you with us, Ken. And as I say, you'll open up at 6 o'clock Eastern time. Are you you're in the East right now, right? You in New York? Okay. Good to see you. So, at any rate, there's also a situation we have in what state were we talking about, Wendy, where a woman is being criminally prosecuted for having an abortion? What's that? What's that?
It's in Ohio, where you just passed the amendment to legalize it, and a 33-year-old Black woman, and I feel like it's relevant to say that. She had a miscarriage, and it happened abruptly. I guess it ended up in the toilet and she flushed it. I don't know what I would do in that situation. I don't know that any of us would. Ended up investigating.
Go ahead.
What's that?
You were
Thank you.
first.
Oh, sorry. So an investigator found out that there was a clogged toilet and found this stillborn fetus in the pipes, and they investigated it, and they scientifically determined it was stillborn. It did not, it was not viable before the birth canal. Her water didn't break, and she will face a grand jury because she's being criminally charged with mistreatment of a corpse.
Oh my God.
I don't even know what to say. It gives me
Don't
chills.
people have anything better to do?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, enough of that. Thank you for that, Wendy. And we did need to update that because this Ohio did just pass a legalization of abortion amendment. So even apparently when a referendum pass, the law still comes down on people. I want to welcome Lissa Matros. Hi, Lissa. Good to see you. And Eric Lazarus, good to see you from New York. We're going to go now to KARL GROSSMAN on Long Island for two major discussions on nuclear issues. The first is this incredible, horrifying, among the worst photographs I've ever seen on the front page of newspapers all over the world. At least 1 million dead fish in northern Japan. Following immediately after the release of millions of gallons of radioactive tritium into the ocean at Fukushima. And of course, the nuclear industry saying there's no possible connection. KARL, you've been with the nuclear issue for many decades. What's your sense of this fish kill in Japan?
Well, I just did a TV program. People could watch it. It's on envirovideo.com. The true story of what's happened at the Fukushima 6-plant nuclear site, and a special focus on it's been going on now for a couple of months, the dumping of radioactive water from that site into the Pacific Ocean, massive amounts, millions and millions of gallons over several years. So, just in the wake of the initial dumping, we have this huge fish kill, and a number of pretty knowledgeable people are pointing to the dumping of these nuclear poisons with the killing of the fish.
Well, we know that very shortly after the Fukushima accident with 4 reactors, and there is a film about it. It's interesting. I believe it's on Netflix or HBO. It's called The Days, Days, and it's a dramatization of what happened inside the Fukushima plant during the disaster. And of course, it takes its place alongside the HBO series, devastating HBO series on Chernobyl. And we're now in the midst, and KARL has reviewed this film of the film on 3 Mile Island. It's called Radioactive: The Women of 3 Mile Island. And KARL has reviewed it widely, and I'll have a review. Oh my God, look at that. You when people can't on the radio can't. I hope to God I'm never in a place like that. We're looking at the picture of the thousands of tons of dead sardines and mackerel that have washed ashore in northern Japan. And of course, the nuclear industry is saying there's no possible connection. When you see this film, The Women of 3 Mile Island, something's sounds like a Geiger counter. When you see the film The Women of 3 Mile Island by Heidi Hutner, you see interviewed. It centers on 4 women, at least 1 or 2 of them I talked to in 1980, 43 years ago, about what was happening at 3 Mile Island. And there, the nuclear industry vehemently denied that any radiation from 3 Mile Island could have caused anybody any harm. And now we see these women interviewed 4 decades later. It's horrifying. It's horrifying. And KARL has seen this film, Women of 3 Mile Island. KARL, what do you want to say about it?
But frankly, it's a masterpiece. I mean, both the film that I did my TV program on, which was done by Philippe Carrillo, who was an astounding director and lives in Vanuatu in the Pacific, and this very much affects all the Pacific. And Heidi teaches at Stony Brook University and has been my friend for many years. And she's done again, it's a masterpiece of the consequences of the 3 Mile Island disaster. I also, let me know, did a documentary on this years ago, 1993, 3 Mile Island Revisited.
Okay, we're getting some bad feedback. KARL, is that you? I guess we're going to have to. There's somebody on 213-220. Sounds like a Geiger counter, but we're going to have to mute. There we go. All right, KARL, try again.
Okay. I also did a documentary on 3 Mile Island where I stand in front of it's 2 nukes there, saying the nuclear industry says no one died as a result of the accident. This is just a number of years after, a few years after, at that nuclear plant. Don't tell that to the people. And I interview various people in the community surrounding next to 3 Mile Island, and a disaster, as Fukushima has been a disaster. And the nuclear industry, the nuclear promoters in government, nevertheless, just keep pushing and pushing.
Right. They keep saying their line is that nobody died at 3 Mile Island. I spent the worst 10 days of my life there in January of 1980. I stood across from the cooling towers in Middletown, Pennsylvania, and I held in my arms a dog that had been born with no eyes. You know, that's not an experience you want to duplicate. And as Karl and I both have interviewed these women who had to see their families decimated by radiation that the industry denied existed. So let's go to, of course, the industry is now denying that any of these fish were harmed by the radiation releases at Fukushima. Kat Kramer is with us, the great Kat Kramer, who does a wonderful film festival. Kat, if you want to pipe in, you've said that you're going to be showing Women of 3 Mile Island at a film festival in LA. If you want to speak.
Yes, yeah. Hi, I have a little rough voice today. I'm planning to, launch Heroes for Change Film Festival, which is basically an extension of Kat Kramer's Films That Change the World. So I'm dealing with all the issues and the nuclear issues and environmental and animal rights and climate, but it's all female-focused films and primarily female filmmakers. And of course, Heidi's film is, high on my radar as one to present. It's really ideal, and I agree it's a masterpiece. And it's an eco-feminist film as well, so it really fits perfectly.
Yeah, it is a great piece of work.
Thank you for supporting it and for bringing it up. And Philippe's movie is also very strong as well. They're both impactful.
When will you be showing the Women of 3 Mile Island?
I don't have the date yet, but it would be around the time that she's going to release the film, I think, on streaming during Women's History Month. And I think March 28th is a significant date.
Yes.
So it would be around, I would like to do it on that date or around that.
Yeah, that's the time of the accident, March 28th,
Yes.
1979. Of course, it led us to the Muse festival concerts of 5 nights at Madison Square Garden in 1979. So at least one good thing came out of it. And Kat, thank you for showing that. Let's switch now quickly to the COP28 fiasco in the Middle East. There was a gathering to discuss, I guess, the climate crisis. It was chaired by a sheik or a sultan or somebody from the oil industry who got in front of the world and said that there's no evidence that burning fossil fuels has any impact on the environment. KARL GROSSMAN, we have 50 people with us, by the way. KARL, you studied this COP28 and wrote about it. Can you give us the blow by blow here?
Yeah, it's just it's called COP because it's Conference of the Parties, which are annual gatherings being held under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it's each year these folks sit around and talk about climate change, global warming. This time it was, the president of this COP 28 one was the chief executive of the state-owned oil company in the Emirates, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. And and this was nicely dug up as the conference began. It's going to end tomorrow, not too soon. The month before the conference, this is in November, in a online interview, spoke about how that if you phase out fossil fuels, you'll take the world back into caves. So this is a guy who's obviously not accepting what scientists all over the world for decades now have determined as the chief cause of global warming, climate change, and that's the burning of fossil fuels. So here you have a person with very special vested interest running this UN conference, and then coming along was a grouping of led by the United States, a grouping of of nations declaring that we must triple the number of nuclear power plants in the world to deal with climate change. There's 440 nukes in the world today, so we do the arithmetic, it'll be well over 1,000. My story and my article ran on a lot of websites, op-ed news, Nation of Change. Originally, I broke it in Counterpunch, the Free Press, and so forth. And my article begins, U.S. leads coalition to triple nuclear power by 2050 in an effort to address climate change. And there I was quoting the lead of a CNBC article. And the CNBC piece went on, the U.S. and more than 20 other countries pledged to triple nuclear power. The declaration is the most concrete step taken by major nations to place nuclear power at the center of the push to transition to clean energy. My piece then goes on, quoting various people, including Harvey Wasserman, as saying this is beyond insane. Mark Jacobson, Dr. Mark Jacobson of Stanford University, the Atmosphere Energy Program there, wrote a tremendous book published earlier this year, No Miracles Needed, How Today's Technology Can Save Our Climate and Clean Our Air. He described this statement, this declaration, as the stupidest policy proposal I've ever seen. And then getting to the issue, because I mean, it's not new, the baloney that nuclear power can somehow be an antidote to climate change is just such baloney. It's not carbon free. It's carbon intensive, the nuclear fuel cycle, particularly the mining, the enrichment, the fabrication of nuclear fuel, and also nuclear plants themselves emit carbon-14, a radioactive form of carbon. And this is kind of the good news. Former heads of nuclear regulation in the U.S., Germany, France, the U.S., Greg Jasko, former NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission chairman, and the former secretary of the UK's Radiation Protection Committee, they earlier issued a statement saying nuclear is just not part of any feasible strategy that could counter climate change. And they detailed all this stuff, risky, too costly, too slow, not suitable, inherently risky. And I'm just reading here from my article, cascading accidents and so forth and so on. So this was the scene at this COP28 conference in recent weeks.
So how you can have a global conference on the disaster of climate change, and then come out of it recommending that we burn more fossil fuel and build new nuclear plants, I think reflects the state of the mindset of much of the world. Ray McClendon is on with us. Ray, are you still there? Georgia has just, I think Ray left us. Georgia is now in the middle of trying to deal with the two new nuclear plants that, well, one came online and one is about to come online, allegedly, although it may not. Two new nuclear plants in Georgia that are over $35 billion. And I don't know what people are expecting for the future of the economy in Georgia, but they are in deep trouble. And we did have previously on our Zoom call a woman who's running for the Public Utilities Commission in Georgia, where they're going to try to decide who's going to pay for this. And it's literally insane. $35 billion will be easily enough to put that state into a deep financial hole for decades to come. And so the idea that we could triple nuclear power in this world at a time when we're seeing massive fish kills at Fukushima and other financial problems is mind-boggling. We also want to raise up, and maybe Tatanka Bricka, you can talk about this, the issue of Diablo Canyon. in California is becoming magnified by a reality that I think people are going to have to face pretty soon, which is that there's an increasing likelihood, as far as I'm concerned, that Gavin Newsom may become president of the United States. We can interpret it however we want, but Joe Biden has recently put out what I think can only be trial balloons about the possibility that he may not run again. When a incumbent president says things like, well, any of 50 people could beat Donald Trump, to me, that states that maybe his wife is telling him it's time to hang up the spurs here. And at this point in time, and again, we are nonpartisan, and this is pure speculation, but there is only one Democrat who stepped forward to provide himself with any kind of profile to run for the White House, and that would be Gavin Newsom. And, there are many things that would recommend him as a candidate. Among others, he's tall. I've met him. He's very tall. He's at least 6'3". And in the 20th century, we've mentioned this before, in the 20th century, the taller candidate won every presidential election. That's not true in the 21st, but, whatever the case, and Gavin Newsom is on the presidential stage, and he is making a decision in California to keep these 2 reactors open at Diablo Canyon that's catastrophic, and has really divided the state and even threatened California's booming solar energy industry. To talk, you're here in the middle of the state. You've been very deeply involved with this. Can you tell us what the vibe is here in terms of Gavin Newsom and Diablo Canyon?
Well, I live about 15 miles away, and the house creaks with the change in the temperature from morning till night. But every time it creaks now, I'm wondering what's happening there, because it's been fully up online for over 2 weeks and 100%. When I saw what happened at COP, and I knew it was coming because people were talking about it's the first time oil corporations have been invited, and I went, uh-oh. When I saw what happened, my first thought was, and there's been things written about this, post JFK's assassination, there's a theory that for W to provide his prove himself, he had to be involved with the only 3 days missing on his campaign were the day before, the day of, and the day after John Jr.'s plane went down in the Atlantic. And then a photo of him and a couple of friends of George W. in front of the JFK or John Jr.'s airplane hangar. When I saw this, I thought, the 2 major parties in the United States have to be president. Do you have to show your fealty to big oil and big nuke? I guess so, because that perfectly times with Newsom's about face here, close to a year and a half ago now, from being pro-solar to coming down on top of rooftop solar and cutting the financing for that and going all in for the revival of Diablo Canyon. The most thoughtful, best way to shut down a nuclear power plant. But, all I've been saying is that nuclear industry is just looking at red ink. They're looking at having to decommission these plants if they were responsible at all. The first thing that was changed in California, but the law used to say that you had to provide a cost-benefit analysis compared to the alternative, and you had to provide, safety information. And those were basically within agreement with the Newsom administration and the NRC. Those were both scrapped and facilitated the $1 billion coming in from the government and the $1 billion from the state. And I'm not even sure where that originally came from, but that's where we're at right now. And it's like the people of the world, need to organize, and we're organizing here and making our attempts to have that shut down through Linda Seeley and the Mothers of Peace that are doing the main on the ground legwork.
Well, the bottom line here, and people need to understand this, is that you had a global conference, a global annual conference that was dealing with the issue of climate change, which everybody with any kind of sanity knows is directly linked to the burning of fossil fuels. And suddenly, in the year 2023, the global conference dealing with climate change is taken over by the oil industry. I mean, just flat out, as KARL has reported. How do you have a conference on global warming run by a Middle Eastern oil baron? It's insane. And then accompanied by a call to triple the nuclear power plants in the world. It's insane. And then at the same time, in California, sorry, Tatanka?
Well, also, we'll maybe have Danny Sheehan on to talk about this. You know, the one issue that independents, Republicans, and Democrats were coming together around over the last several months was a Schumer bill to pass this legislation to basically make public what the nuclear industry and the aerospace industry is known for our entire lifetimes about the existence of UFOs and the 70 plus civil races they've found, and the downing of the planes and the reverse engineering of that, what they've been doing with it. Our U.S. taxpayer money, ever since Eisenhower, GE and Raytheon and the corporate structure took over the government structure, but that it's our technology. And this was going through very, very well until just a little over a week ago, right before our weekly meeting, where Danny called up and said, sorry, I've got work to do tonight. Gates on the floor of the MAGA, people in Congress was having a press conference the next day, and they got to Tuberville and another guy in Ohio, with the two major aerospace areas. And they got to them, and evidently it's not going to go through, and they're going to hold up the whole funding thing now over this to make changes in it. So what the changes they made in the legislation were the guts of it. Danny Sheehan had been involved in this process, but the guts of it is it was going to give the Senate the office that was set up in the Senate and the House to take information from the military. It was a presidential order that Biden had signed and approved that started on 2 days before Christmas last year, that ordered the Pentagon, all aspects of the military, the Defense Department, the intelligence community, and private contractors to reveal everything they know about ETs and UFOs. They call them UAPs now, since January of 1945. And so then the number of people coming from the military, because Danny had a client who was prevented from doing his job, the top guy in the Pentagon. And that led to a series of meetings within the Defense Department, which led to this legislation. This was the bill to formalize it with the Congress and to fund this committee of civilians that Danny Sheehan was setting up that would vet all the information, because you can imagine things coming out from the aerospace industry and the military that a lot of it won't be true, right? So what Gates and the other people did is they positioned what was going on as obstruction to revealing the truth. And they were the ones that wanted to hijack this whole issue anyway, in order to have the budget go through this incredibly bad piece of legislation, which got rid of the civilian committee and got rid of the ability of that commission with subpoena power to get the information that the military didn't want. Now, what's underneath it? You're saying, why are we talking UFOs with all this? Imagine this. This is one of the things that has to be confirmed. Imagine a United States created aircraft, which they have, that can go at such a speed that within less than 2 minutes could deliver nuclear payload to Beijing or Moscow.
Well, talking in addition to all that on the Congress and the great work you've done, and we're going to discuss this further in California on the energy issue. Newsom, and this is critical, and then we're going to go to John Steiner and Camilla Reese. California has been the great, as you know, proving ground for renewable energy. And in California, we have 1.8 million rooftop solar installations, generating far more power than the one nuclear power plant in California left, which is Diablo Canyon. And until last year, there was in place a landmark path-breaking deal, which was signed by the governor of California in 2016, was then Jerry Brown, the lieutenant governor, who's Gavin Newsom, the current governor, and a very likely candidate for president of the United States, the state legislature, the owner of the nuclear plant, the major unions, the local governments, the local environmental groups, all signed on to this very carefully designed package to phase out the Diablo Canyon nuclear plants, the last in California, in 2024 and the next year in 2025. And this was proceeding, and the renewable energy replacement for Diablo Canyon was moving ahead very, very well. This is an industry in California, solar power, that employs 70,000 people, 70,000, 70,000 people. And suddenly, in April of last year, the governor, who had signed this deal in 2016, strong arms the legislature and pulls the deal, leaving us with the possibility that Diablo Canyon, these two nuclear plants, would continue to operate for another 20 years.
Yeah. Well, all I'll say is that we should not be surprised that the most powerful people in the world around energy are resisting and doing this. This is what they do. It's corporate capture of COP now, along with corporate capture of governments. So we just need to have an effective, nonviolent international movement for all the things we're facing.
This is basically the fossil nuclear empire strikes back.
Right.
There is no doubt that with the work of Amory Lovins, who's been on with us, and Mark Jacobson and so many others, we see very clearly that the entire energy supply for the world can come from renewables, efficiency, and especially now huge breakthroughs in batteries. We have California now,
and they also had to eliminate the competitive market out of the place. It's like too big to not fail, too big to, I don't even know what to call it. It's just right with California, when it's proving itself financially as well in every other way, they had to basically shut down the market and tilt it in the favor of the utilities and the oil companies and the nuclear giants.
So now in California, we actually have battery storage, backup battery storage with 3 times the capacity of Diablo Canyon. So there is absolutely no possible justification for continuing to operate Diablo Canyon as a counterbalance to possible blackouts. And yet we have this guy who, at 6'3", 6'4", governor of the biggest state, governor of a political entity which could be the 5th largest economy in the world, now reversing his entire career and becoming pro-nuclear. And it's a terrifying prospect. We're going to go, thank you, Karl and Tatanka, for those expositions. We'll go to Camilla and John in a minute. Let me just get these 2 questions. Justin and then Steve Kaiser, and then we'll move ahead. Justin LeBlanc. Let's get you unmuted. We have
I have Steve go first because mine's kind of a wrap.
Okay, Steve Kaiser, go ahead. We have 57 people.
I don't know what all to say about this. This is really a big area. I've been a ufologist myself for about 35 years, and I'm witnessing it all starting to really explode. the information about this is coming out at the seams. They can no longer contain it. We've been in an era probably since 41 where the Cape Girardeau craft came down in Missouri to the present time to deny actually acquiring these craft and secreting them away. Area 51 was a prime place for this particular escort. Is that enough? Am I talking too much?
Yeah, no, that's good. And we wanted to keep on the UFO issue, and we thank you, Steve, for that. And we're going to do it in more detail at a future date if we can do that. Is that good for you?
Anyway, I just wanted to describe, we've been in this closed condition since the 40s about the craft.
Yes.
About abductions, probably the Betty and Barney Hill thing in 61.
Okay.
When it started. Anyway, there's a lot coming out. We do have a craft almost certainly that we have produced with cooperating with aliens on this.
Okay, Steve,
yes. But
we're going to come back to that at a later date because we got an agenda here, but we appreciate that. And thank you for talking.
Okay, it's all exploding right now, and it's going to be a big paradigm shift in the next 5 to 10 years.
A paradigm shift in that, in UFOs, and also in energy. Justin, real quick, and then we're going to go to John and Camilla. Justin, go ahead.
It looks like Wendy's come on, so I'm going to defer to her first as well.
Okay, Wendy, just real quick, and then Justin, and then we're going to go to John and Camilla.
Thank you. Sorry, really quick. Just to say that you were talking about Gavin possibly becoming president, and I just remembered Florida just canceled its primaries. The Democratic Party and the caucus and everybody only qualified Biden to be on the ballot, so we're not going to have a ballot for the primaries, even though Marianne's polling better than any of the Republicans. Yeah, so I just thought that was kind of pertinent, and yeah, I just want to say that. Thank you.
Well, that's a big piece of information. We'll deal with that in depth later. Thank you for that, Justin, and then we're going to switch over to John and Camilla.
Sure. So there's a lot of this throwing in the towel even before the fight starts, and I'm basically going to, in a future session, want to really dig in deep as to why we don't have a really strong solidarity movement despite things like climate marches. But the summary of all of it, and I'm a Cal Poly graduate, so I'll give you the hands-on tour of this, is we have 3 examples each of overriding self-control, overriding smarts, and overriding the services sector. And it's all based on the media system that Dr. Epstein brought up to us last week. And so I want to give a wider lens on all of that when I get a chance for a long...
maybe in the second hour. That'd be great. I will say that at the top of the hour, we're going to be joined by Dr. Kenneth Stern from the Bard College Center for the Study of Hate. And we're going to have another roundtable on the Middle East and Ukraine, about which I read some very disturbing stuff. So thank you for that, Justin, and stick with us. We're going to go now to the issue of fundraising, both specific to this cause and in general for the progressive movement and getting our funding switched over to grassroots organizing. And we have 2 really, really great figures in this sector, John Steiner, who's out in Colorado, and Camilla Reese, who's in Rhode Island, who've been with us from the start and have been really, really great. We did put in the invitation a summary of the funding, the overview of the need for it for these calls. And but it's been a pleasure to work with John and Camilla on these issues. And go ahead, both of you, please. We'll go to the top of the hour, and then we'll go to our Middle East discussion. So take it away, John and/or Camilla.
Thank you, Harvey. And I'll start, and then Camilla will come on. So just greetings to everybody on this call. I think each of us, Harvey, you call great whenever you introduce one of us. So I'm glad to be part of the great team that's on every week. And the other thing I would say is what follows is an unpaid political announcement. And this is really on behalf of GREEP. And as Harvey alluded to, part of what we're doing is helping other groups raise money, but this one's for us. So I've been part of a small team that's been meeting on behalf of financially supporting you, Harvey, and your team that does great work on putting on these calls every week. And as you wrote in the great piece in your announcement today, and which we're going to send out to everyone as an attachment. And Stephen, if it's possible, could you put that in chat? Or just refer back to what Harvey sent out this morning. We need to raise close to $60,000 for next year, which allows Harvey, Wendy Lederman, Stephen Caruso, and Mike Hirsch to be reasonably and fairly compensated for their good work each week on our behalf. And we're looking to raise half of that starting today and going into early January. And we're hoping that a prior donor to GREEP will be able to match that. So to that end, and in that spirit, that money follows relationship, and our own kind of informal GoFundMe campaign, we're inviting everyone on the call to make a donation of any amount. And Steve, could you again put the donation piece in the chat? And then to invite you to reach out to others you might know who might also be willing to chip in. We're also going to follow this up with an email to everyone on Harvey's list. So Camilla, would you add a little bit to that and fill out a
Sure.
few contours?
Yeah. So, well, what we're trying to do is leverage all of our contacts and Harvey's contacts to support this fabulous forum going forward. And they really deserve it. And it's always a good thing if we can say that a certain percentage of the participants are support it. So even the smallest amount to show your, in support would be helpful. And then the second thing is, who do you know who give $100? Who do you know who give 1,000 or more? And understand that sometimes it's easier to be a fundraiser for other people instead of for yourself. At least that's what I've found. But in this case, it's actually kind of an opportunity as I see it, because we're not just asking for money. We're educating, we're giving them value. We're telling them about these calls, and they can participate or listen live or on the recordings, and they can share it with their constituents, their friends, their people. So there's real value here. So I would say, if there are people that you can think of that might be donors, approach them from a place of real abundance and not scarcity, because these calls are valuable. They are really unique. And in fact, one of our members, one of our group, David Saltman, he's been in the news business for many years. He told me once that he gets more information, more valuable information here than in the mainstream news. So there's real value here, and we'd like more people to know about it, support it, and we'd really appreciate everybody's help in any way that you can.
Thank
Well,
you, Camilla.
for
The
that.
only thing that Camilla and I would add to that, if there's anybody on the call who might be able to take us to a major donor, however we define that, it could even be a few $100, and you would like us to approach them on your behalf, please let us know, and one of us on the team will get back to you or to them. I'll put my email address in the chat when we're done here. And then Mike Hirsch, would you just come on and kind of elaborate what Harvey has put into this incredible document of what you have seen as just the extraordinary value that we all get to these calls each week?
Thank you so much. And I'll be very brief, but I really hope everybody pays attention. This is not just information, although it absolutely is. You'll get information from these Zooms that you probably will not get 99.9% of other places. Rare information from eyewitnesses, people on the front lines, whether they're battling to free Julian Assange, or whether it's Stephen Donziger himself talking about his own travails. You'll hear from leaders of organizations like the National Organization for Women. You'll hear from authors who have cutting-edge books with exciting information. But beyond all the information that you're getting, which is great, we're also the connective tissue for the nonpartisan, non-affiliated, progressive movement. We bring people together who, Harvey always says this, you guys, if you don't know each other, you should. And next thing you know, they're working together. It's like instant coalition. Just add Harvey, because he brings people together. And the one that leaps to mind is Andrea Miller, who's one of our favorites, and Ray McClendon, who's another one of our favorites. and they come on. And another thing that's different about this, some shows you'll hear from somebody every few months. We have some of the top leaders, some of the most intelligent, effective organizers in the country that come on week after week after week, because we're helping to organize organizers. And Ray and Andrea are a perfect example of that. They were both doing everything that they could in their most tremendous ways to get out the vote in Georgia, because with a higher turnout, we get better elected officials. I'm not going to make any partisan statements about that. It's just a fact of life. And Ray and Andrew were both doing great work together. I mean, apart, but when they came on to this show, we put them together. They got to know each other. And because both of them are consummate organizers, they immediately saw the value in working together. They started working together and good things happened. And that is the value added that this Zoom with Harvey Wasserman, he's going to be very modest and say he's just a guy joking around and telling stories and making his observations. But don't let him fool you. He's been doing this all his life. He's been constructing movements where movements were needed. And this is the latest and greatest effort where he can sit there and, put his teeth in, roll up his sleeves, and get down to work. And in his kind and wise and thoughtful way, he is making a big impact without making a big fuss about it at all. And we're all part of it. Everybody who comes to these Zooms, we're all part of it. We're all suggesting guests like Keith Ellison, Jim Hightower, my own state senator, Jeff Waldstreicher. I saw him the other day and he was so happy. He said, I was so shocked to see how many people were on the Zoom. There aren't that many Zooms where there's more than just a handful of people anymore. He said he was getting flashbacks to the depths of the pandemic. And I said, yeah, but you don't have to get tested after a GREEP Zoom. But this is somebody who's been in government for 16 years. This will be going into his 17th year. And he had never seen anything like it. He's been working and active in Maryland, and we gave him a crash course on the precarious nuclear reactor in Maryland. Yeah, he'd heard about it, but we made it a priority for him. These are the kinds of things that happen on this Zoom. Maybe it happens somewhere else, but I haven't seen it. I haven't seen movements created in real time, week after week after week, movements that actually go out and get things done. And we are going to close down Diablo Canyon. We are going to close down these other nuclear reactors. And when we do, it's going to be because of this Zoom. And we're not only going to do that, we're going to do a whole bunch of other things. We're going to close down Cop City. We're going to fight for free speech and journalism. And we know this because the guests who come on here tell us that we will. So we're going to do it. But we can't keep doing it without your support. So please, I sound like a pledge drive here, but that's one thing Sluggo insisted that we not do. But we're going to make an exception as we get into the holidays. Dig deep, pitch in, keep us doing, and all of us, not just Sluggo, not just the guests, not just the moderators, but everybody on this Zoom, keep us empowered, keep us focused. And Mila just said, we're not going to take all the credit. No, we're not, but we're going to do what we can. And considering our shoestring budget and the fact that we meet for a couple hours and then sometimes a little longer than that each week, we are the mouse that roared. We are the voice of the people. We are people power at work. And we're the most democratic way of doing things, small d, most progressive way of doing things, big P. And so P can also stand for pitch in. We really need your help. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mike. That's beautiful. Thank you, John and Camilla.
Harvey, we're almost done. Not quite. One more
Yeah,
thing.
go ahead, please.
Mike, again, yes, thank you. Nobody could have said it better. And Stephen Caruso, if it's possible to edit just what we have been talking about, that's something, we can have available to everybody on the call to support all of you in your efforts, and we can send it out to the whole list. So we can talk about that when we're offline. But mostly on behalf of the team and Harvey, continued great work, and we're here to support you.
Thank you so much. We all really appreciate it. Camilla, did you want to add in before we move on? Okay.
Nope, the link to donate is in the chat, and as is the recently polished and finalized GREEP document that Harvey wrote. It's great.
Great. Well, thank you both, John and Camilla, and thank you, of course, Mike. You guys have been really above and beyond. So I will tell you the story. When we first started, I had no consciousness of raising money. And I got a call really early, two and a half years ago. A friend of mine from Greenpeace had tuned into the calls. I don't even know how he got to us. I'll leave him unnamed. And he called me and asked me if we wanted $25,000. And I said, well, yeah, I guess that'd be all right. And so that's how we wound up with Steve Caruso, Wendy Liederman, and Mike Hirsch. So if you folks know funders, that's really a big piece of it. I know a lot of you are just grassroots activists, but if you know funders and can put us on their lists, it is before the end of the year, and that would be helpful. I will add also that in the funding world, one of the major motivating issues that we've been dealing with on these calls is to switch progressive funding in elections from media buys to grassroots campaigning. And this is one of the, we consider ourselves a grassroots group, and we've had Andrea, as Mike mentioned, Andrea Miller and Ray McClendon, who were unified or put together by this call, but also really have committed and laid the groundwork for what's going to be especially important in 24, which is to get any progressive money going into elections away from party media buys and into democracy centers and relational organizing and all the other stuff that made the difference in Georgia in 2020, 21, and 22. And now Camilla and John and I, along with Mike and Wendy and Steve and others have been, and Joel Siegel especially, Joel really, who thankfully is with us today, has been one of the great pioneers in this. If anybody has given us the guidance to understand the need to switch from media campaigning to grassroots campaigning, it's been the great Joel Siegel. So really glad to have you with us. And we also have Maya Van Rossen, who's done the green amendments. One of the things we intend to do in the coming year with John and Camilla's guidance, and also Joel and Mike, is to make this a big campaign issue in the progressive community, so that people understand that money going to media buys is a waste, and money going to relational and democracy center organizing is really what's going to make the difference, as it did, by the way, in 2020 and 22. So there you go. Thank you so much, John and Camilla. Thank you for making me do that. We did put up a piece that if you can circulate, if you have to know a millionaire here or there to help support us, and we do pass money on. We actually passed a lot of money on in 2020 when we first came on the scene and started talking about grassroots relational organizing, and it did make a difference, actually. So if people want to consider that, we do appreciate it. Okay? Thank you so much. Thank you again, John and Camilla. I would have never done that myself. Thank you, Mike and Wendy, and so many others, you, Joel. Okay, that having said that, we're gonna move. Does anybody else want to chime in before we move ahead? It's the top of the hour. We have promised to move into. I hope John and Camilla, you are satisfied with this piece of the puzzle, and we will make it more tangible as we go ahead. Okay. We do. Ken Stern has joined us and Dave Saltman. We are going to jump into the discussion. This is our third roundtable of the wars going on in the world now, especially in the Middle East and Ukraine. I do want to give Ellie Parisi a real quick call. Just we can come to you later. That'd be great. Ellie Parisi, go ahead. You haven't spoken, and then we'll go to Ken Stern and Dave Saltman. Ellie, unmute. I think you've not been with us before. Okay, there we go. I hope. Trying to unmute you here. Okay.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Great. Thank you. So thank you so much for having me. I'm Ellie Parisi. I'm a chemical and biomolecular engineer. And I received word that you guys were talking about Dr. Robert Epstein's research last
Yeah, but
week.
Ellie, can you stick with us until we go to the end of this discussion? Would that be all right with you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
We're a little behind schedule. Ellie, we appreciate you being with us. And Justin, if you both hold your peace, we have two really distinguished, not that you're not distinguished, we have two really distinguished guests with us who are on a timetable. So we will
Looking
come
forward
to
to
it.
it.
Okay, thank you. So Ken Stern, and Dave Saltman. Maybe I should have Dave Saltman introduce you, Ken. I read your bio, and it would take the whole rest of the hour to go through it. You are one impressive dude.
I'm just old.
Oh yeah, well you're not as old as I am, but and you still have your teeth. So Ken Stern and Dave Saltman, if you guys will lead us, we're in this horrible dilemma. I've been beating myself up trying to figure out what to say, if anything, publicly about the conflict in the Middle East. If I had my way, I would have the leaders of Hamas on trial in The Hague with the leaders of Israel, starting with Netanyahu. Don't get me going on Netanyahu. We'll be here for the next hour. But I wish we will be, but it won't be as productive as hearing from you and Dave. So, Ellie, Ken, will you tell us about the Center for the Study of Hate at Bard College and where this fits in? And Dave Saltman, if you'll chime in. Dave Saltman is our great media vet, been with us forever. So go ahead, you guys. Ken, if you'll start,
Sure.
tell us what is the Center for the Study of Hate?
First of all, thank you for inviting me, and this is all from my colleague from AJC from years ago, Dave Saltman. So it's a pleasure to do that with him too. Basically, David and others who worked in NGOs dealing with anti-Semitism, other types of hatred would probably ratify is that a lot of what the groups do that oppose hatred really are doing it by the seat of their pants or their anger about things in the news and so forth. And there was an observation a number of years ago. There's a tremendous amount of good information that comes out of the academy, but it's not translating into what NGOs are doing, what government is doing, what philanthropists are supporting, and that there needed to be an effort to sort of marshal the knowledge that's also siloed in different parts of the academy into something larger and useful, just sort of like we do with medicine because people get sick. So therefore we pull from biology and chemistry and physics to answer that, or for architecture, from art and physics and math and so forth. So, it's the idea that we're going to marshal what we know about human hatred, the ability of people, no matter where or when, to see and define an other, and sometimes that leading to demonization, dehumanization, great violence, genocide, and so forth, and trying to construct at least what we could do that does no harm. So Bard set up a center in 2018, which I'm honored to direct, but had a hand in the establishment of the first one at Gonzaga University in the late 90s, and there's one in UCLA and other places, and we're trying to make all of us smarter about how we think about hatred. So that's my day job. The other part of it is that on the Israel-Palestine stuff, I've obviously been very interested in that for a long time. And what I've seen is the application of what we know from things about hate to understand not only the conflict to a degree, because that gets more complicated than just hate. It's different national narratives and so forth. But what we're seeing, like playing out in front of Congress and colleges the last few weeks, what my last book a couple of years ago it's called the conflict over the conflict. Why, when people get into such buckets where their identity is tethered to an issue of perceived social justice or injustice, how our brains work differently, how we seek certainty, how we get into these moral, spinning worlds where all morality is on our side and the other side is, if not stupid, but evil. And it gets very difficult to have empathy or the intellectual imagination to understand why somebody would see something differently. So that's part of what I've been doing too. I know that Harvey and others have mentioned a couple of other things that resonate with the work that we're doing. The importance of democracy. I think that democracy is a key prerequisite to fighting hatred of any kind. And the idea of free speech. What we're seeing now, and I don't know if anybody wants to talk about the congressional hearings this last week, or the letter that the Governor Hochul put out over the weekend that said, you're going to get in trouble with the school if you say anything that's perceived as being, pro-genocide, even as a matter of opinion. That we're sacrificing what the academy can do by trying to censor people we don't like and using government to do that. And I see all sides in this conflict doing that. So those are all the things I'm sort of working on, but I'm happy to delve into any of them any deeper than you'd like. You tell me what you want to talk about.
Well, this is phenomenally fascinating, and these hearings in the Congress with these 3 female presidents of universities were staggering, and it's really going to take a lot to figure out what actually happened there. We had one resignation, and what's it all about? Dave Saltman, do you want to jump in, and then we'll go back to Ken? Ken, you've written a number of books. Dave Saltman has made 200 documentaries, including Emmy award-winning stuff. Dave Saltman, if you'll jump in, and then we'll go back and forth between you and Ken, and we'll take questions.
Okay. Hi, Ken. Really good to see you.
Likewise.
Between the two of you, I've known the two of you a combined total of 90 years. That's ridiculous. Anyway, I'm not sure I have much to add at this point, except I would like to just maybe put one personal note into this, because I've discovered from the course of this conversation in recent periods that my personal background is a little different from most American Jews. My mother, who would be 100 years old this year, was born in 1923 in Haifa, Palestine. My mother is a Palestinian Jew, and I've seen her passport. She has a Palestinian passport. And when Golda Meir said, "I'm a Palestinian," she wasn't being metaphorical. She was stating a simple fact about what her passport said. Now, and my mother comes from a very old family in Israel, one of the largest families in Israel. And they're one of the very few families that go back to biblical times. They never went on the diaspora. This is my mother's family through the female line. And so when I went to Israel to visit them, I've only been there a couple of times, and I'm not a specialist in Israel, although I have studied Islamic history and I've spent a lot of time in the Arab world, and I've studied Arabic and so on. So I'm only slightly less stupid about it than most people. What I was shocked by was the fact that all of my mother's family, who were super well-educated and charming people, are completely fluent in Arabic and in Hebrew and in English, spoken without accents in any of those languages. And they also were good in French and German and Russian and whatnot too, because that's just what, Jewish intellectuals do, I suppose. Anyway, their take on they had grown up with Arabs. My great uncle used to take me for walks in the street. He was born in Jerusalem, by the way. My mother was born in Haifa. My grandmother was born in Akko. The others were born in Sfat, that whole northern tier of Israel. My family owned a well in Haifa which became the subject of the very first lawsuit filed against the new Israeli government in 1948. The Israeli government wanted to take this well over by eminent domain, and my family sued the Israeli government and won the case. And this is now the very first case that you ever study if you go to law school in Israel. So their perspective on this was totally different from what I'm hearing now. First of all, of course, they considered Jews to be what was it, Franz Fanon, who called them the wretched of the earth and the oppressed people of the world. And they saw Israel, of course, as the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy and so on. But more to the point, they were there. This family married into a lot of the original Zionists who came over in 1880, started buying up land in 1880 until 1948. And, so they were very familiar with the Zionist movement, of course, and they were very much, the thing that I'm trying to get across is they liked Arabs. They were very not only knowledgeable about Arabs and about Islam and about all sorts of esoteric Arab customs and Sufism they knew all about and so on. They reveled in this. This was part of the charm of living there. And they would take me out for walks in the street, and I would meet these, dervishes that they knew and so on. There was tremendous bonding. This is now, we're talking about, pre-67 and even post-67. All of that changed in my view and in their view in the 70s. And I just want to add one more thing, and then I want Ken really is the expert on this, not me. They considered, when you talked about the two-state solution, for them, they were all there in 1920 and in 1919, the Treaty of Paris, which was the first presentation of the two-state solution. And they were very much this is where the Jewish state was first called Palestine. And it was first called Palestine, not by the Jews, but by Prince Faisal, who had been elected king of the Arabs for purposes of negotiating the peace treaty that ended the Turkish Empire in World War I. And the Palestine Mandate was divided into two parts. The western part was called Palestine by Prince Faisal in a document that you can read if you know the publication Foreign Relations of the United States, which is the official State Department history of the world. It's in there, the original, in his handwriting. And the second state, the eastern part of Palestine, is the place we now call Jordan. They always considered this was the original two-state solution. And it's not only that they considered it, and this is my last statement here, this was signed by all parties, including the Palestinian Arabs, the Zionists, the winners of the war, the five Allied powers, and in the Treaty of Paris and then the Treaty of Sèvres, the Turks deeded the territory over to them for further disposition. So from my relatives' viewpoint, ancient Jews who lived in the historical homeland forever, the two-state solution is 100 years old, roughly this year.
I got to tell you that Dave's knowledge is quite unique. We've talked about this, he and I, for hours. And Ken,
Sure.
thank you, Dave, and stay with us. My personal feeling about this situation, which is, I think, actually close to the predominant view in Israel, is that this is Netanyahu's war, and that he has set this thing up to go on forever so that he can stay in power and out of jail. That's my personal view, and I'm reading Haaretz and other things from the Middle East and from Israel, if it's not the predominant view, it's certainly common, along with the idea that he deliberately opened the gates for Hamas to come in and do this horrible slaughter. And there's no doubt, it's in the New York Times yesterday, a major piece, that Netanyahu has been supporting Hamas for years as his partner in Gaza. Where does it all fall in? And I'm going to ask you a very simple question. How do we solve this situation? Okay.
So yeah, right. Yeah, well, there's an easy solution.
There's your assignment for the next half hour. So go ahead and tell us.
So anyway, so a couple of points. One is, I even way before October 7th, and I agree with you, Netanyahu's a disaster. You can spend forever talking about that. But going back even to 67, what David was talking about, I think when especially since 93, when the history of this period is written, I think the major problem, in addition to the things on the Arab side, are that the Israelis didn't do enough to make the Palestinian Authority successful. They did, in fact, support Hamas as a counterbalance to the Palestinian Authority. I see the two-state solution as the only thing that could possibly work, and Israel has, undermined it in various ways. Not to say that the Palestinians did everything they should have. They haven't. A few points to pick up off of what David was talking about, because I think they're important. My family didn't go back there that far, but I had a great uncle that went over in the 1920s. But part of the way I look at the conflict is, again, through the sort of hate studies lens, and the fact that when we get so juiced about issues that are important to us, we go into these binary buckets. And again, it's not just on Israel and Palestine. We see it on abortion. We see it on, MAGA. We see it on so many immigration, so many other issues. So let me give you a couple of examples of where I see some of the discussion about this getting into those buckets, about the conflict itself, but reflected in some ways on the campus. When I put the book together to talk about why each side was trying to censor the other and was getting into these maximalist views, I felt I needed to put out the two narratives, the Jewish-Israeli one and the Palestinian one. And I put out the Jewish one, very much like David said. Jews have always been there, and talked about the Bible, the importance of the religion, the importance of the culture, the synagogues, any place focused towards Jerusalem, the importance of the land and the history to Jewish people. And then I set out the Palestinian narrative, and I had a draft of the chapter that I shared with an academic friend, and she said, it's really important which one you put first. And I thought about that, and I put the one that I'm more comfortable with, the Jewish one, first. But then I had a long footnote that said, imagine if I had decided to do it the other way and put the Palestinian story, that Arabs were always there, and you always had Jews there, but they were a minority. And then you started having this Jewish immigration from the Zionist movement, from pogroms, certainly after World War II. And they lost their ability to control their lives in the way that they had envisioned it was capable. And I said, imagine if I had started with that narrative and brought in Jews as secondary characters, basically to thwart your ability to achieve what you wanted. How would that make you feel? So that's one vignette of the sort of the buckets of where we go into these things with that nuance. Second is we've seen a lot in the last couple of months of campus stuff with people talking about Israel as a settler colonialist society. And I have in my book this couplet that I really like of a group called the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, which really started the BDS movement in many ways. And it sent a letter to the Iroquois Confederacy in New York. And I knew these folks, David knows, I used to be the co-counsel for Dennis Banks, as the co-founder of the American Indian Movement, and wrote a book about that too. And so I got to know some of the people when he was hiding out from, getting extradited to South Dakota in the 80s, hiding out in the Iroquois Confederacy. So I knew a lot of those guys. Why did the Packby folks write to the Iroquois? Because the Iroquois basically loved lacrosse. They claimed that they invented it, and they were going to go to the international or world lacrosse championship in Tel Aviv. And Packby said, "Don't do it. You're victims of settler colonialism, like we are. It's a betrayal. Don't." And I contrasted that with a quote from Judea Pearl, who's a UCLA professor. I guess he's now emeritus. The father of Daniel Pearl, the journalist who was beheaded. And he said, "Name me another settler colonialist that speaks the language before the current inhabitants. Name me another settler colonialist that names towns, not New Baghdad, New York, New Berlin, but names of in biblical time," and so forth. And then I quote an academic that says, the ability to have both of those thoughts in your mind at the same time is true history. The rest is simply communal advocacy. And then the third thing, again, we've been so focused these last few weeks about not only the conflict, but again, most of my interviews have been about the campus stuff, on strict rules, what we should say, what we shouldn't say. Is it anti-Semitism? Is it not anti-Semitism? Let me tell you what academics can actually do. There's a class that I promote in the last part of the book about all the things that the campus can do to mine this great issue, to get people to think about why people are so disturbed, and why we're seeing what we're seeing on the campus at the moment. And I could talk more about that too, but this one is really an interesting one because David was talking about the pre-48. So what it is, it's a simulation class, and what it does is it looks at the Peel Commission from the 1930s. And those that might not remember, when David was right, the Brits had the mandate. And, there were riots, there were attacks between Jews and Arabs, and the Brits said, "What should we do?" So they sent Lord Peel to go and talk to everybody. And he did. And he, it was the late 30s. And what the class is not only giving the background information, but the students had to take a character, either one of the Brits or one of the Arabs, or one of the Jews, and faithfully represent them for 6 or 8 weeks. Do the research, pretend they're them in that commission. So this is, the guts of the conflict, before the Holocaust, before 67, before current events for sure. And the students had to, whenever possible, get a role that was against type. So the way I found out about this class is there was a Pakistani Muslim woman who spent 6 or 8 weeks in the skin of David Ben-Gurion. And, when I talked to her about that experience, she said, "Gee, you think that was weird?" I had an Israeli classmate who had to be the mufti, remember the guy who hid out with Hitler. And she said, as much of a pain in the butt as he was in that class, the guy that was the Jabotinsky figure, the far right, founder of Irgun on my side, was much worse to deal with. So, the real complexities of this. And when I talked to the professor who came up with this class, she laughed and said, "It's really funny. Students would come in and say, 'Great, now we're going to know how to solve the Israel-Palestine conflict.' And then they come out of the class and say, 'Now we know 80 some odd years after the Peel Commission why it hasn't been solved.'" So I think those are some of the things that, we want to get simple answers. I don't know that there's simple answers to the conflict. I know that some of the answers to what we're seeing on the campus don't go down the road of censorship and do go down the road of making sure students aren't harassed, intimidated, or bullied, but that they damn well better expect to hear things that are going to, disturb them to their core. And then as academics, we have to help them think about, okay, how do we mine that to understand the world better, and why people who are otherwise friendly in our school may have such diametrically opposed views. And, I think the more focus on that, and that's what I've been pushing college presidents and so forth, how are you going to use this as an educational moment? how do you use hate studies in particular to help open up people's minds to what's happening, to get a better understanding of the world that they're going to inherit. So let me take your questions if that's okay, Harvey. You're muted.
There we go. I'm muted. Sorry. Unmute myself here. There we go. Sorry about that. When you study hate, what are the resources used? And then we'll go to environment. But when I first saw that, the study of hate, what's your curriculum?
Well, it's interesting. At Bard, we have, I think, the first course initiative. And so these are classes that intersect the definition of hate studies, which is looking at the human capacity to define an us and a them, and the things that promote dehumanization and the things that can combat it. So it's across the board. We even have dance classes and art classes that intersect, looking at the us and them and how it works. We also have, at UCLA and at Bard and other places, too, things that look at hate directly, again, from the interdisciplinary aspect of it. So to just give you, a couple of examples, we have a book that's going to come out in 2024 that's pulled from experts in philosophy, political science, and looking at conspiracy theory, social psychology, other things. I'm pulling it together as a unit. And to give it, I'm basically saying, if you were running one of these NGOs looking at hate and incorporating what you know from your other academics, what would you do, what wouldn't you do, and why? And starting out with the philosopher is going to do, sort of the equivalent of a Hippocratic oath. First, do no harm. How do we make sure we do no harm, pulling from these different fields? Other examples of how we, pull together from these different fields that all have something to say, but look at them too much in segregation. Psychology, just what makes humans hate individually. Social psychology, what do we do as a group? Political science, how it reflects in power. Trying to put those things together. So one of the interdisciplinary things that we did, there's a colleague put together the first State of Hate Index, and what that is he had the observation, like, remember the old Green Book, that African Americans would have to know which hotel to go to or not. Same thing in the Catskills, which places Jews could go and which could not. And he had the observation that where you are in the country, and this is before the Dobbs decision, really impacts how much hate you're going to experience. Not just the one state versus another in the number of hate crimes, but the anti-LGBTQ laws, other things to look at it in a more holistic way. So those are the things, both how hate manifests and how we can combat it. And there's, with the UCLA, I think they're going on 30 different research projects. I mean, they're going down from what makes individuals commit hate crimes to larger society. There are too many questions, to answer, but as long as we bring together sort of the overarching, understanding that human beings have this capacity, this brain science that shows that our brains fire differently when we hate somebody. There's a whole bunch of things to guide us if we can sort of unlock the key, and that's part of what we're doing. So I don't have the answers yet, but we're getting better on asking the questions.
Lynn Feinerman. Lynn is a radio host and very knowledgeable. Lynn, please go ahead. Let me unmute you here. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the kind words, Harvey. I would like to respond to what David Saltman was talking about his forebears, his grandmother, his etc. By the way, my mother is 100, and she was born in 1923. And she's still around. Quite a generation. Anyway, I would like to read something because I think that the heart of the matter, you've come close to the heart of the matter, and I would like to read something to you from Ben-Zion Netanyahu. Okay, this is what Ben-Zion Netanyahu said. He's the father of Benjamin Netanyahu, And he says the tendency toward conflict is in the essence of the Arab. He is an enemy by essence. His personality won't allow him any compromise or agreement. It doesn't matter what kind of resistance he will meet, what price he will pay. His existence is one of perpetual war. Now, I read that because I wanted to point out that for generations, there have been people who have said things about quote unquote Arabs. And that has been a source of profound prejudice and profound hatred. And, you know, people who are, who do Torah study a lot will quote you what a creator supposedly said to Hagar when Ishmael was born. And that's where that's derived, really, is the image of the so-called Arab. I would say that when your grandmother was flourishing there, so was Martin Buber. And he had an entirely different, he was a philosopher, he was a Jewish statesperson, he was a marvelous person. His granddaughter, a great-granddaughter, by the way, was in my Jewish group. And he suggested that, you know, hello, we were all humans and we could all get along because we've gotten along historically for hundreds and hundreds of years. In Hebron alone, there was a peace for 600 years between Jews and Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Muslims, so much so that women would nurse each other's babies. That's how close everybody was. And what I'd like to say is that a lot of the conflict comes from that demonizing of the so-called Arab by those who came to Israel later. Okay, and those were the European and American white folks. And they were at their core, maybe not by their nature, but at their core, racist. And I think that that's why they are accused these days in Israel of being racist. And I would also just like to point out as a final comment that 40%, over 40% of Israeli Jews are in fact, hello, Arabs. They're Mizrahi Jews. They originated, their families originated there, and they look just like the Palestinians. You cannot tell the difference. But there is no acknowledgement of that. And that's why I would just like to say to both of you that the use of the word Arab is, you know, is such a trigger point to me, because it does not really, immediately when it's used, you know, Jews and Arabs, it's totally misleading. It's wrong. It's inaccurate. It's a mistake. And it is a progenitor of alienation. So I could go on, and thank you both Harvey and Mike Hirsch and Steve for allowing me the extra time. But
well,
I guess
you're worth
that's,
it, man.
well, thank you,
And you should
sweetheart.
probably have Ken on your radio show with David.
Yeah, I would love to, except Ken is a boy. I mean, a man. I mean, Women Rising Radio is
Hey,
women.
I'm a feminist.
He's just a boy
so
at heart, though.
And I'm married to a rabbi. I'm a Rebbitzin. What, you know?
You are? How
I am.
about that?
Well,
Well,
that's
that's very interesting.
linguistically, that's an interesting term. What is the term? What is the Yiddish or Jewish term for a man who's married to a woman, a female rabbi?
What the
I
rabbis
don't
say about
think-
this is lucky.
Yeah,
All right.
lucky. Glücken, Yiddish Glücken.
All right, since we're in a small humor mode, I will tell you that in terms of the study of hate, I grew up and then went to school in the center of two studies of hate. I grew up as a Red Sox fan and do hate Yankee fans. And I also went to the University of Michigan, though I lived in Columbus. And don't ask me what we think of Ohio State. So there you go. Okay, you should study that at Bard. Lynn, do you want to wrap? And then we're going to go to Julie Weiner.
Yeah, I would just say by way of questioning, since, most of all of it was commentary, is to Ken, how do you, do you have like a separate, sub course in just the terminology and language and how people talk about each other, what the labels are? Because for me, even pro-Israel and pro-Palestine is profoundly alienating. I'm pro-humanity, and I don't want to be stuck in some, round hole with my square or triangular peggishness,
I think it's the other way around, actually. I think you have a round personality and you're stuck in a hole. But let's talk to Ken about that.
And just a couple of things, just for you and anybody else who wants to continue the conversation, let me give you my email. It's kstern@bard.edu. So KSTERN @bard.edu. There's on our website we have a collection of hate studies syllabi from around the world. So there are classes that you can look at that people have taught, not just on this issue, but the whole breadth of hate as well. And one of the things that a colleague at Bard is doing, given the current conflict and what we're seeing on the campus, is all these terms are being thrown around. Like we're talking about language, anti-Semitism, settler colonialism, genocide, ethnic cleansing, Zionism, anti-Zionism. And they're being thrown around as rhetorical weapons. So what she's doing is putting together a class saying, okay, let's examine what each of these terms mean, how they're being used, how they're being understood. And that, we don't have the syllabus yet because she's putting it together. I'm going to do a couple of the components for her. But I think that'll be a good model that we should have out in the spring. And I'm, happy to report back to anybody about how it went.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Lynn, for that. Quite profound. Julie and then Dave.
Yeah, thank you for both of these presentations. Dave, I'm really intrigued by the history that I wasn't really aware of, although I've seen some references to it in some of the Zionist defenses of their, I think the word is accurate, ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and the desire to expel them back to Jordan. So let me take a step. The question I wanted to ask is the implication of that history that the current two-state solution would best be to expel the Palestinians to Jordan? I don't think Jordan is particularly in favor of that, and nor are the Palestinians who are now living where they're living. So that's one question. But
can I address that?
Yeah, please.
That's a very good question and very pertinent question. So let's just you got a lot of stuff to unpack in there. Let's not talk about expelling anybody just yet. Okay, that was the Kahane position, and I don't. And,
the Netanyahu position.
I'm trying to, and it's very difficult to just present what are unescapable facts without saying what my position or what some good position might be. Because honestly, I don't know like anybody else. But here's something to think about. Regardless of what you do with the West Bank, Jordan has to be a player because it shares a big fat border with the West Bank. There's no way that Jordan doesn't sign off on whatever it is. It can't happen otherwise. So yes, Jordan is definitely a player. Whether Jordan is the Palestinian state, that was the position of everybody from 1920. By the way, I just wanted to say to Lynn, thank you for that presentation. My mother just died a few months ago at age 99. I don't know how they did it, maybe it was all the preservatives they ate or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, so that's a good question. I think, and I will, if you really look into, now this is probably going to get me in trouble, and I'm not absolutely sure of the factual situation at the moment, but I will tell you this. Ken, maybe you know the answer to this. For quite some time, Jordan had in its laws something very similar to what we're talking about, the right of return. Jordanians or Palestinian Arabs who had left any part of Mandate Palestine had the right to return to Jordan and get immediate citizenship. Same thing that Israel says about the Jews. Now I'm told, and it's not easy to get real factual, like up-to-date information about what's the current situation in Jordan. And all the contacts I used to have are all, either dead or retired. So no, I can't go to my usual go-to people. I used to have really good contacts in the Arab world. And I just wanted to also address that question about the use of the word Arab and the Arab hatred and so on. As I mentioned before, I spent a lot of time in the Islamic world. I've lived in it. I've studied Arabic language and Arab Islamic history and so on. And when you're there, like you were describing in Hebron, Lynn, there's a tremendous bonding. There's a tremendous similarity in these two peoples. You can really get Isaac and Ishmael, and you can say, like, it either seems like, you can get that God, told one group you got to do Ishmael and told the other group you got to do Isaac. I mean, it makes some kind of weird sense, Don't ask me to explain that. So anyway, about Jordan, here is where I can be I think on solid ground without giving an opinion, but offering what I think are indisputable facts, which in my view is going to be when you really want to solve this problem, you have to start at this point. You can, wherever it goes from there. I should start by saying, whatever the aggrieved parties want to do, I'm for it in advance. If they can agree to whatever, knock yourselves out. Just please do it and get out of my head for once, So having said that, I think you have to, here's the point, and here's why I brought that up about the Treaty of Paris and about the treaty that ended World War I. All the parties to that treaty signed it. It is in force today. It is the operating law governing this situation. It deals with the legal status of Jerusalem, the legal status of the West Bank, the legal status of the East Bank, and it was all signed as part of an international peace treaty. It's never been repudiated by any party. Ken, you're a lawyer. Tell me if I'm wrong here. It's never been repudiated, and it's still in force. It was the treaty that ended World War I. Period. Nothing else has been agreed to. All the UN resolutions were resolutions. They had no legal standing whatsoever. But this was voted unanimously by the League of Nations. It was ratified by the U.S. Senate unanimously. It was agreed to by all the aggrieved parties, including the Turks, who were the designated owners of the property. And remember how the Arabs got into this in the first place. Did everybody here see Lawrence of Arabia? You know that movie was historically pretty accurate. The only difference is that the guy played by Omar Sharif was really played by Prince Faisal. He was the leader, he was the commander of the Arab Legion. And Prince Faisal was voted in a meeting in Mecca of what they call the Higher Arab Council. He was voted King of the Arabs, just for purposes of negotiating the peace treaty for World War I. Lawrence of Arabia was his translator at the peace talks. You can see their pictures. This is all public documents. So I'm saying this is the place we have to start, it seems to me, because it's the only thing anyone's ever actually agreed to.
Okay. Well, you've got history on your slide. I do want to, we'll get to Wendy Liederman, and then I want to ask Ken and Dave. Oh, Julie, did you have more that you wanted to say?
Yeah, I really wanted to, I wanted to ask a couple of more questions. I went to a Reform synagogue Sunday school from 5th grade, and when I got to college, I was shocked to learn from Middle Eastern fellow students in Madison that about the Deir Yassin massacre, because my teachers never taught me about any such thing. And everybody in the Middle East knew about it, and in Asia. So then I buried my head in the sand for 40 years or so, got pressured to join a synagogue by a late minister friend of mine in Yonkers, and decided before I could do that, I better do some reading and find out decide for myself what I thought. So it's only a couple of decades ago that I started catching up on reading. And, I try to do it by participating to help my current synagogue organize an Israel reading group. So we choose books, and we've read books from all over the political spectrum, and I've learned a little more history, but I guess I'm asking both of you for a few more books to add to the reading list. I'm active with Jewish Voice for Peace now. I just want to see since 2014, I've felt as though those bombs are raining on my head. And I've felt that Judaism has been disgracing itself by the behavior of the Jewish state in terms of the utter lack of humanity and utter callousness. I mean, I think.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, I guess I could use a few more books. I'm really interested in all this.
Okay, thank you, Julie.
History and how it shapes your thinking about the current situation.
Sure. I think Derek Penzler wrote a recent book on Zionism. I want to give this more thought, so email me and I'll
put when you can in the chat. It's a great question. Wendy, if you'll wait just a minute, I have a question. Sorry, but I want to ask you, how significant would it be in this particular time to remove Netanyahu? Because from my point of view, I do not put it past, this is the JFK theory of Jewish, Rabin was murdered in 1995. And it's all been downhill since. And it seemed to me that at that point in time, Rabin might have been able to make peace. And the one beneficiary who many people continue to suspect had a hand in murdering Rabin is Netanyahu. And he is the principal architect, as far as I'm concerned, of this horrible situation. We all know he supported Hamas. We all know that he's facing a prison term. As far as I can tell, the war will never end if he's in power. Because if he's in power, he knows if he goes out of power, he's going to go to jail. How much of this is personal, and how much of this will be solved by getting him on trial in The Hague?
Well, I don't know what's going to happen with him. I suspect that the same things there'll be an inquiry once the shooting stops.
But that's the point. It won't stop.
But the point is that you have other forces in Israeli society, right? It's been going further and further to the right. The left got decimated, more than a decade ago. You have the demographics of the people that are having 3 and 4 and 5 kids are the ones that tend to be more to the right and more religious. And as hard as it is to perceive, in the current coalition, there are people farther to the right, much more fascist. As horrible as I think Netanyahu is, there are people to his right, and those people aren't going to disappear. And this was before October 7th. So I don't see him leaving as everything's going to be hunky-dory. I think there are still, significant problems. And to, get back to the last question about how do we look at Israel and the different ways that's one of the things that's playing out now in the debate internally in the Jewish community, and I think that's important to underscore. There are a lot of us who remember 67, remember 73, and may not like the current government, may be appalled by Netanyahu, but are still are Zionists, right? It's mostly a newer generation that have very much like the story that was just told, where they went through Jewish day school, get to college, and then all of a sudden hear about something called the occupation, and feel betrayed. Why did I go through a Jewish experience? And I'm hearing this from people whose parents and grandparents were either lay or professional people at major Jewish organizations. They feel betrayed, and betrayed is a very strong emotion. And these are the young, Jews who are in Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine, and If Not Now. And what they're saying is, from my understanding of Judaism and what it means to repair the world, or how do we treat the stranger, I can't justify Zionism with that. Now, I may disagree with them, but who am I to say that they're not Jewish? And that's what, part of the debate now about pushing definitions of anti-Semitism, one of which I was the lead drafter for, or the one that they're pushing I was the lead drafter for, into law. All these simple, solutions are partly to say to be a Jew means to be supportive of Israel, and to be a Jew does not necessarily. Most Jews are supporting of Israel's right to exist, but not everybody. And asking Congress and state legislators to decide this internal question really worries me, as a matter of church state and as a matter of the implications for the Jewish community.
Wow, Wendy, I'm sorry to interrupt you before. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. No,
She's
this is
Wendy
very
Liederman,
fascinating.
again, she's one of our co-conveners.
Hi.
Hi.
We still
Thank
have 47 people with us. We're going to keep doing this. I mean, these obviously Ken and David and Julie, wonderful speech, and Lynn. This is really deep stuff. So feel free, even if you're not Jewish, to jump in here, please. Wendy, go ahead.
Thank you. I was pretty compelled to chime in. Just I heard you mention Dobbs a few times, and I have forgive me, I'm losing my voice because I've been petitioning for a couple of months for abortion rights in Florida, and I have to go through a lot of people because we have a very conservative. I'm in Miami, and I'm seeing just all I can say is like vitriol that we're talking about. I've been seeing it and taking kind of the brunt of it for a couple of months, and also like kind of getting a taste of like maybe what Black people have experienced in America for a very long time. And I'm saying, and I feel like I should mention I dropped out of Hebrew school when I was 9 years old, because the whole way they were like trying to force you to believe in something that isn't proven, but that everybody else is wrong, and possibly punishment for believing something otherwise. Like that's where I came from growing up. But now even today I was at a Home Depot parking lot, and some guy tells me I'm going to hell, and then he starts screaming at me from across the parking lot, calling me a killer and a murderer. Somebody stops to sign the petition because he felt bad for me. The guy starts screaming at this person too. So I know it's a circus. It's funny as a bird's eye. So what I'm seeing is that, I think that this hatred comes from a few different possible sources. Like there's fear, there's stupidity. There's also what I think is, and brainwashing is another one. But I think really too, it's like people's own discord within themselves and their own subconscious, and maybe even a need for control. They're trying to put laws on other people, and so it comes from these places. And also, I was a teenager in the 90s. I was born in 1980, and that was a time, in the 80s and the 90s, where there was like a lot of healing happening from the civil rights movement. I mean, we were coming past that. We were post, not really, but generally, I had a lot of Black friends. My mom wasn't always happy about that, and it was like too bad, and just really like the whole effort though was on people coming together, and there was just this massive, just wait on TV, had more Black shows, all these different things. And now I am hearing like the confidence and the arrogance that people will speak, the things people will tell me that a woman's body isn't her own, and just even far beyond things in the name of God. Like if a woman's health or life is in danger, it's God's will. And they want to make this the law. And this is what, they're spitting out. And you wouldn't hear these things 5 years ago, 10 years ago. They wouldn't have the confidence to say it. So I guess what I'm getting at is in your studies and your data, are there times where you saw that things were getting better and some of these divides were able to be successfully healed, and even like the traumas that create this hatred and this rhetoric, like where people could start coming together, and can we take lessons from that, if that makes sense? Thank you for hearing me out.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
I don't think that there's, any sort of magical moment that I can look back. There were times where certainly things were better in the sense that I'm old enough to remember during the height of the civil rights movement, there were a lot of blacks and Jews working together, students going down, on summer things, Freedom Summer and so forth. So there were times where there were segments that were working together. But I think the drive. Well, I wrote a book on the Oklahoma City bombing. Went back to the history of the far right, the Klan, the Minutemen, the Posse Comitatus, and all that. So it's not like there was a pristine period. And the picture that you saw before of the Bard Center for the Study of Hate website, that was 86th Street in Manhattan, where the Nazi flags were there. So there were times, and we had the Ku Klux Klan marching down the streets of Washington. So, we have a complicated history. That being said, I think it's the ideas and people's identity and things that get fear, as you were saying, get animated, and the idea that, justice is on our side. And we want to look at things in very simply. That abortion is murder and there's no complicated aspect of it, so therefore you're a murderer if you're trying to support abortion rights, without thinking, gee, maybe somebody has a different religious tradition, maybe somebody has wants to prioritize having a woman having the same control over her body as a man does. Let's talk about these things. But instead people go down into their buckets, and part of this, I think, is being, again, it's the ideas, but they're being sort of put on steroids by some of the things we're seeing at the moment. I think, cable news, forget about social media for the moment. Cable news is monetized by, the problem is not complicated. It's simple. It's their fault, and pushing people to further and further and further, see the world that way. When I was a bard in the 70s, there was a little bit of graffiti I saw said, if I didn't believe it with my own mind, I never would have seen it. And I think it's pushing people further into that, preordained view of the world, because other people are now being seen as supporting that. And, my wife goes crazy when I say I have to turn off CNN and MSNBC and watch Fox News, because I have to understand how, put myself, have the intellectual imagination. Somebody's watching it, what they're thinking, how they're thinking. If I'm going to organize, for democracy, and I see some of the folks that are, addicted to that as opposing, I have to understand it, and not to demonize them or dehumanize them by any means, but just to understand better. And I think the more we can get, to see across the divides, the better. On Israel-Palestine, I'll give you one example and then shut up about this. Where I start off the book was a situation at the Hate Study Center at Gonzaga, where I knew people very well. That was where the Aryan nations were very big, and in the Spokane region, and the Aryan Nations was shut down by a lawsuit by the Southern Poverty Law Center, but partly because it had been set up by the cooperation of the Jewish community and the peace and justice folks. There was a peace and justice group that had a pro-boycott, divestment, and sanction webpage on its site. Jewish group was calling them anti-Semites. They weren't talking to each other for 8 years. Meanwhile, white supremacist bumper stickers, white supremacist thing on lampposts, a backpack with BBs soaked in rat poison with a remote control put in a Martin Luther King Day parade that thank God didn't go off. And these folks had enough interest to realize, we're not going to solve Israel-Palestine, but we may be able to do something about the guy around the corner in the garage that's planning to do something to one of us. And they needed to get a vocabulary, sat down, did learning, pulled from hate studies first, and then to go into the Israel-Palestine stuff. 4 years later, they're still talking to each other. So there are ways when people want to do it as opposed to feel self-righteous and go into their buckets. But I see so many people today on both sides just wanting to be so morally pure and beating up the other side without actually having the capacity to see the humanity of people on the other side.
So we're at 4 o'clock. Steve Caruso, if you don't mind, we still have 47 people with us, for God's sakes. We'll go to 4:20 if that's okay, Ken and David, if you can make the time to be with us. Julie Weiner, thank you so much for that narration, by the way, and Lynn, both of you guys are really right on point. The question then becomes, is there some biological imperative in the human makeup that brings us hate? I mean, it's an emotion, I don't even know if Cain hated Abel, but whatever. But deep in our DNA, there seems to be an unavoidable imperative to hate, right? And I don't even know if LSD has been able to transcend that. What do we do about that?
I did a webinar with Robert Sapolsky, who's the biggest, brain about the brain. I'm a brilliant guy. And really, you can put people into MRI machines and see how their hate fires, differently. So it's not preordained who we're going to hate, but the capacity to sort of pre-wire to see in us and in them is very much there. And again, it's complicated. It's a combination of different other emotions that relate to it: envy, fear, disgust, and so forth, that relate to how hatred gets manifested. And hate gets manifested as attitudes, behaviors, and so it gets certainly into ideologies and theologies. But it is very much, reflective of how human beings see the world, and from the us's and the them's.
Well, instead of ideology and all that stuff, I mean, they have located in the brain centers for various alterable emotions, right? Love, hunger, thirst, all that basic stuff. Is there a center in the brain that you could zap and eliminate the imperative to hate?
Oh, yeah, that's way beyond my pay scale. And although it was interesting, that you should mention that. I was thinking that in college, my parents were both doctors, and I was fascinated with hate since then. I thought, gee, is there a way you take a pill? But then we become less human. So I think the question is, how do we manage it? How do we manage it better? And how do we understand it better, as opposed to, how do we make ourselves into something that we're not, that I would find distressing.
God, I don't know, man. I mean, if you could eliminate the hate center in the brain, and we've have books like Brave New World and Soma. Remember Soma, the drug that they used in Brave New World? I mean, that would be. I bet that something comes to that at some point in time. But
you'll take out a patent. It's okay. You'll let David know.
Well, the question is: are human beings hardwired to hate? I mean, look, I mentioned this before in jest, but you don't walk around Columbus, Ohio, on the weekend of the big game wearing Michigan stuff. I mean, it's just you don't do that, right? And that's about as trivial as it can get, I suppose. So anyway, Steve Caruso, who's in Columbus, go ahead. What did you want to say, Steve? You haven't talked yet. You got to mute yourself, Mr. Engineer. I can't unmute you here.
All
There.
right, there you go. So in Columbus, Ohio, Thanksgiving, I spent at a vegan meetup, and a guy there who lived in a farm in Tennessee, who's now a well-known vegan doctor or whatever, and he's saying that adrenaline pumps out when these guys are running their hate schemes or whatever. And then a new thing that he's discovered is this thing called adenochrome, which is the transition from adrenaline to the next phase. And that is what's prevalent in the body when somebody is following through on this evil deed that they just committed, and they kind of boiling over with this adenochrome, which is essentially what seems to be what Netanyahu and these fascists in Israel are prevailing with. And, just like the Bush administration in Iraq and Putin in Russia, they've got this adrenaline, they've got this adenochrome, and they just keep pushing the ugliness of the human condition to the forefront in everybody's mind. That's all I got to say.
Well, then you talk about Hitler. I mean, Hitler was the whole German army was on meth, and methadone. What does that have to do with militarized hate? Dave Saltman, you raised a hand, Dave. You're right, Steve.
Harvey, you and I, as both old friends of Gilda Radner, know that all truth is really found in jokes. So I want to just say, do you know the definition of anti-Semitism?
No.
Disliking Jews more than is absolutely necessary.
There you go.
But it's to that thing about the brain.
There, I mean, and then there's, of course, I got gone really far afield here, but I can't resist. There's reincarnation. What happens when a Jew who hates Arabs gets reincarnated, obviously as an Arab? I mean, it should be that that reincarnation should be the ultimate payback for ethnic hatred. I hope that's how the world works, but you never know, right? I don't know. Does Islam accept reincarnation? I know Judaism does and Hinduism does, but I don't know about Islam. Who hasn't had a hand? Ellie Parisi, I know you want to talk about, and we've only got 13 minutes left. I know you want to talk about the work on Google. Could you do me a favor? And I will reward you if you'll come back next week. Okay?
Yeah, that's
So
wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, because I think it'd be a diversion, and this is a great discussion. My God, we still have
Absolutely.
46 people with us. So, but I'll give you your own time next week. Okay?
Great.
All
Thank
right.
you. And thanks to everyone who's spoken so far.
Thank you. So let's do that. We're going to go to Justin, Tatanka, and Lynn, and we're almost out of time. So Justin, go ahead. Oh,
No.
all right. Go ahead.
So mine is on the same topic as Ellie's with Dr. Robert Epstein, but I wanted to give this as far as that us versus them perspective. That
Okay.
there's a guy named Cory Doctorow, also a Jew, who has a website for plural society called pluralistic.net. And he talks about his own transformation from getting off of cigarettes and the addiction that was forced by the messaging around him. And he said he actually needed to engage in a battle of wills, that it wasn't enough to say that the cigarettes are going to kill me in 40 years, or I'm going to suffer from COPD or other sorts of maladies in the meantime. No, he literally had to say to himself that I am being told that the cigarettes are something that I need. I'm being told that they're healthy for me, or at least that they're not that bad. And it is an entire campaign against me. And so to support myself, I have to other the Philip Morris company and others who are trying to manipulate me this way. And so that there is a healthy us versus them, but it's not usually against your neighbor. It's usually against the mind messaging system.
Wow, that's really interesting. Listen, before we lose track of time, I want to thank Camilla and John for doing our fundraising thing. Mike and Wendy and Steve for running the show here. Thank you guys so much. Actually, Tatanka, I was going to go to you, but Lissa has not spoken. And Lissa Matras, do you want to jump in, and then we'll go to Tatanka and Lynn, please?
Yes, I was just going to say that so often how we feel about other people.
Oh, wait, you went to mute somehow. You got muted. Why? There. Lissa? Oh, come on. There, go ahead.
In 1972, I found myself in Tunisia for 3 weeks because it was raining in Rome. I mean, that's how you made decisions back then. And it was 3 of the most amazing weeks because my life in Chicago did not include much contact with Arab people. And they were just the most welcoming, kind people. And the only bad thing that happened was when we went to Jerba to see the ancient synagogue. And not only couldn't I speak to the man, the shamus who was running it, because he didn't speak French. He only spoke Arabic and Hebrew. And he only wanted to sell me postcards, whereas most of the Tunisians had just gone out of their way to embrace us as people from another land. And so I think one of the main problems for me and my generation has been the lack of contact with people we see as other. And you know, I don't know. I think that maybe Ken and David could figure out ways to bring people. I mean, it might be too late at this point, but to bring younger people together, not necessarily to debate the Middle East, but just to get to know people, to share Greek, these wonderful fried egg foods that Tunis had a lot of. It's just, you know, a tragedy that we don't know each other. That's all I wanted to say. And thank you to everybody who has said such meaningful things.
Well, I'm sure this is one of the very few discussions of this problem where nobody's been screaming at each other. So thank you for that. I will say, you know, that guy was selling you postcards. The first Arab that I ever met when I got into Israel and got off the train in Haifa wanted to sell me pot. So I think that was a good start. Anyway, actually it was hashish, but you know, we won't quibble. Tatanka, Lynn, and then we'll give the last words to David and Ken. This has been an amazing session, by the way. Thank you so much, both of you, and everybody. Really mind-boggling. We still have 43 people with us. So go ahead, Lynn, please. And Tatanka, and then Lynn.
Yeah, thank you, Ken, and thank you, David. Thank you, everyone that contributed. I'll tell a little bit about me, and then I have 2 questions for you, Ken. My whole adult life, well, actually, since I've been young, is pursuing a life of community activism around nonviolence. And I've been constantly challenged by my own anger, right? And there are 2 experiences that were really helpful, and I just wondered if they're part of what you study. One was by the reevaluation or co-counseling community, where what they would do with different communities, with men and women, straight and gay, black and white, and they did it with Israelis and Palestinians, where they would have 2 circles, and one group in the middle would just be talking about their own. Well, they have a system of healing, so they would talk about different trauma, different fear, different hurts, and the role of the people on the outside was simply to listen. And when they're triggered, don't interrupt, just try to stay present, and then they'd reverse it. And there was so much learning of the anguish and trauma of, quote, the other side, that it just a lot of the otherness just completely disappeared. The second is the spiritual folks, my teachers in yoga and other places that I've admired, are the ones that actually remember I grew up Catholic. They had the thing of heaven and hell, right? Never made sense to me. It was much too boring. Besides, my dad never asked my mom to become Catholic, and I'm supposed to pray for her sorry soul. And as far as I'm concerned, she's a saint. So anyway, when I dropped the Catholic Church, I fell into reincarnation because it was like the gardens we always had. It was like, regenerating a garden out of the compost pile. And I had misunderstood a lot of my own history because when I was encountering going up the creek where I lived, and I'd encounter Native people, all kinds of experience, and I would come home and tell the story. Oh, you have such an active imagination. Well, it turned out when I started remembering past lives, when I gave myself a gift of a decade with Native people and just being more in touch with nature than just the human community, I started remembering all kinds of past lives, and some of them were glorious. But it was at a time after I'd really learned about the Bush's role with Hitler and funding the Third Reich and all that. And W was in office, and I had so much animus as I used to have toward Reagan, et cetera. And I had this dream about a horrendous past life that was mine. And I woke up the next day and I just went, "Oh, W, you got nothing on me. I've outdone you." What it did is it brought kind of I don't know, it brought a neutrality. And then I was able to have dreams about being with the elite and knowing what they were going to do before they did it, because I was one of them as well as one of the other. Anyway, so my second part of the question is there's historical trauma, but it's not just within my life. Instead of seeing my life as a book from conception to my present time, it became one page in a whole tome of many past lives and the roles we played. So my other question is, any exploration around that when in the healing process here?
Interesting idea. Let me get Lynn in, and then we'll finish with Dave and Ken, if that's okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lynn, please, and then we'll go to Dave and Ken and let Steve go home. Lynn Fireman?
Yes, I thought I would be called last, and I thought I would inject a note of humor.
Well, go ahead, please.
A lot of this, a lot of what we're dealing with is about what Tatanka was talking about, the ideas that are inculcated into us when we're children, and the ideas that are not allowed for us to entertain when we're children. The old song from South Pacific, you've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. So I thought I would just quote regarding religion. First from Voltaire, the philosopher, he said, "If Creator has made us in his image, we have returned him the favor."
That's good.
And then, of course, the immortal George Carlin. Religion easily has the best bullshit story of all time. Think about it. Religion has convinced people that there's an invisible man living in the sky who watches everything you do every minute of the day. And the invisible man has a list of 10 specific things he doesn't want you to do. And if you do any of those things, he will send you to a special place of burning and fire and smoke and torture and anguish for you to live forever and suffer and burn and scream until the end of time. But he loves you. Oh, yes, he loves you. He loves you, and he needs money.
Well, as Robin Williams once said when he was portraying an evangelical on TV, the word audit does not appear in the Bible. So there you go. Okay. Wow, that was great, Lynn. Thank you. All right, we're really down to the wire. Dave, and then Ken will give you the wrap up. Dave,
I yield the floor to you.
Ken.
Thank you all for inviting me. Just one, I guess, comment from the, not the, the last comment, but the one before that about, thinking about hate. Hate, the opposite is not love, it's empathy. And that's part of what I think, we're talking about with these different exercises and stuff. There's one thing that, we have a lot of different programs we're trying to push at the center. One thing which I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to do, but I'll mention it very briefly. I would love to at some point, based on some social psychological principles from some old studies, find a way to have a summer program, 6 weeks or so, take kids that are just finishing high school before they go off to college and meet people from different backgrounds. Take a Jewish kid from New York and a black kid from Chicago and a Hispanic kid from LA, and send them with some structure to go to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and do a project together for Habitat for Humanity or something. Have people, there's some data that shows if you give people some overarching sense of purpose that goes across groups, they're working together for a common purpose, it'll potentially reduce prejudice. So I'd love to see that type of thing worked out in other types of programs. But the empathy, the pushing of empathy to me is the key, and not only in Israel, but here too.
Wow, thank you so much. I hope you will come back with us, Dave. Thank you, guys. Thank you, John and Camilla, everybody. This was an amazing session, and it will be archived if you want to send it in. To finish, Ken, you're testifying in front of a congressional hearing on
No, I
Wednesday?
have. No, that was a little while ago. There was the one that I was, just with the college president stuff. They only had one slot, and I suggested that Pam take it for the Democrats. So, but I've testified a number of times, and I'm sure I will again. And
Well,
people
we'll
are
watch
interested.
for you. And hopefully you'll come back and join us in 2024. Thank you so much, Steve Caruso, for sticking with us, Mike, everybody, and
Thank you,
couldn't be
Harvey.
better. We'll see you. We're going to meet next week, and then the 2 weeks after our Christmas and New Year's. So we won't do that, but we will meet next week again, same time, same place. Thank you, guys, everybody, and no nukes.